So people have asked all the time, why do people use drugs? And they think, well, it's because they got hurt in an injury and they started using the drugs. And that's true. There's four main reasons in a wide variety of drugs. To deal with physical pain, both prescription and street drugs. To deal with emotional pain, same thing. To party or get high. I talk to a lot of young people, and yeah, they started partying, getting high, experimenting, risky behavior. And then the fourth thing that we never talk about is to improve performance and get more done. And a lot of times that improved performance part is doing good until you keep ramping up the amount of drug, and then it becomes more of an addiction, whether it's Adderall or even cocaine or even heroin to improve performance. And so then you become an addict, or it becomes an addiction versus just a drug use. Yeah, so nihilism is interesting. So I've talked to parents, and I've talked to some young people especially who have an active addiction problem. And a lot of them, of this group, they don't like to leave the house, and they don't work, and they don't go to school. And I talk to them and find out that they really, not only don't they have a purpose in life, they don't really think life has any purpose or meaning at all. It has no meaning. They're not going to go to school. They're not going to work. And they just basically want to stay in the house for 20 years and then have their parents leave them the house. And I thought about this, and I said, that's the strangest behavior. But I started looking it up, and it's more than entitlement, and it's more than narcissism. It's, I don't care about anything, and that's nihilism. There's no purpose, you kind of don't care, and you're just going to get out of life what you can get for yourself today. And it's very selfish, but it has no over long-term purpose. You don't get anything done, there's no purpose in life. Parents don't get it at all, but it's kind of what happens with some people. And some of those individuals, they put them through rehab, they've tried their best, they've sent them to California or Florida, and they come back and they said, okay, that's good, I was on vacation, but I'm not gonna go and work a job. And a lot of them have said, I have a big student loan, I'm not gonna work for 12 bucks an hour. Why, the man or whatever is, no one's giving me a break. And so instead of saying, okay, I'm gonna start with sweeping floors and work my way up, it's like, I'm not buying into this. And that's part of that nihilistic behavior. And I'm not ever telling a parent, if your kid's addicted or is drinking, to not help them. You always want to be there and you always want to help them. But there's a certain percent that really don't, in their current state, want to do anything but use drugs or drink. And they continue that way. And that behavior of no purpose, nothing to look forward to other than being high is a nihilistic behavior. Yeah, so I came up with this based on what Iceland does. Iceland is a whole different way of looking at drugs and a whole different way of looking at alcohol and mental health. And it came up with an idea that if we can come up with a better way to figure out what's the matter, maybe people won't use drugs, and then we won't have to get them off the drugs. So basically, people are unhappy with their life, and a lot of it has to do is they don't have a purpose. So we talk very heavily about purpose, and a purpose is everybody should have at least one. All it is something you like to do that you're good at, and we talk about purpose. Then the second part is, let's find out what's bugging people like they do in Europe. If we know what's bugging them and what's stressing them out, then we can correct it so they won't become depressed and in despair and suicidal. So how that works is talking to a lot of teenagers and their parents and reading a lot of stuff. I came up with this like 1-page, 25-question worry survey. 1 to 5, what are you worried about? And then they fill it out, it takes 5 minutes. It's not like one of the surveys that goes into the schools that takes you a whole day to do. It's 5 minutes. Then I crank it in Excel and I figure out, okay, what is worrying the kids? Once we figure out what they're worried about, maybe we can correct those worries and then it won't progress to the depression and whatever. So what we found out is, regardless of what school we go to, and we've gone to 5 different schools now, and I have several hundred of them, it's 5 things that worry the kids the most. They have too much to do, they can't get everything done, their grades, how much college costs, and getting a good job when they get out of school. Those worries exceed bullying, environment, all those worries are in there, but they're not at the top. So these are some basic worries that people don't even think about. The parents need to start working with their kids to decrease those worries. And I found most of those worries are directly related to high smartphone, social media use. Because if you use your phone over 2 hours a day, or you're playing Fortnite or whatever over 2 hours a day, you just don't have enough time to get things done. So I never say when I do the school groups, I never say, well, don't use your phone. What I say is, you have to realize that there's only a certain number of hours. Once those hours are exceeded, things will fall through the cracks, which is the things that you're telling everybody they're worried about. Yeah, now this is I'm going to say a little bit dangerous, and you have to be very, very careful about this, because what I've talked to parents, and a lot of parents that I've talked to who have lost children, 20, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, and they say all the time when I talk to them one-on-one, if I only knew what to look for, I could have maybe stopped it. And the answer is yes and no, because here's what happens. I can tell you what to look for, but if you ever call somebody out on a drug or alcohol behavior and they are not ready to tell you about it, awful things could happen. Things like suicide. They can kill themselves during the night. They can just pack up and leave home. Because what I say is, people that use drugs and drink, they're not in denial. They need you to be in denial. They want the people around them to be in denial so they can keep up their activity. So this is important that parents know that, because I have parents that are ordering drug test cups off of Amazon, and they're testing their kids for drugs, and then they're accusing them of using drugs without any professional intervention or help. That's very dangerous. So you got to know that if you make a decision and do this, a really bad thing could happen. That said, people say, well, what do I look for? Other than what you hear all the time, which is, well, his grades went down and he's isolating, she's isolating himself, emotionally not acting the same. And I think those are all really good things. But here's some other really interesting clues that I picked up over the years, basically working at St. Mary's. Not the crime lab, because crime lab I just did street drug testing. St. Mary's I had to interact with patients through the doctors and behaviors. And so I'll separate it into two groups, stimulants and depressants. So if you have someone who's on a stimulant, whether it's amphetamines, MDMA, let's take amphetamines, MDMA, and coke as a big group of stimulants, including meth. Those people are hot all the time. Their temperature's up, their blood pressure's up, they're hot. So what that means is they're physically hot. So you're gonna see they're inappropriately dressed for the weather. It could be because they're hot all the time. Even in the winter, they're going out with no coat. They're going out with not even a sweater on. You go, well, why? It's 10 degrees out. No, I'm fine. So when people are really, really hot and they're not sick, possibly a stimulant. At the same time, all those stimulants, coke and amphetamine group, they dilate your pupils. So I tell people, get used to looking in your kid's eyes. I mean, not like going right up and but your typical eye outside your iris and your pupil, think of it as a third, a third, a third. So across the colored area of the iris, the pupil should be about a third. So it'd be like three pupils across. So if you have a huge pupil, it's usually a stimulant. So now, and they make what's called clumsy mistakes. They're nervous. So you say, my kid's always so nervous all the time. He never was. That's a stimulant effect. You're nervous, knocking things over, bumping into things, breaking things, whether at work. That's a stimulant. Now, it may not be, it may be something totally different, but that's the stimulant group. The other group is the depressant group, whether it's alcohol, oxy, heroin, opioids, those are depressants. Now, take alcohol aside and just look at all the opiates, because that's what we're really care about. Opiates slow your body, decrease body temperature, slow your heart rate, and you get cold. So now you're cold all the time. So now it's the summer, and you're out on the beach, and you got a parka on. And is Johnny sick? Why does he have a parka on? And I tell the parents, the easiest way to tell is, the temperature of your kid, right? You know what they feel like. Now, when you're nervous, your hands always get cold. And I'm not saying to go grab your kid all the time by the wrist, but You can tell if they're hot or cold, and if they're not sick, if they're on a depressant, especially an opioid, their temperature is down. Now, if you have an opioid, they have pinpoint pupils. Cops know this. They absolutely know this. And they look in your eyes when in the car, you have a teeny pinpoint pupil, that's an opioid. And it's like, wow, it's an opioid. I can tell. So that is a good to know. And the clumsiness of depressants is just the opposite. People are very, very slow, and they knock things over because they kind of don't keep track of them. But they're moving slow, but they're still clumsy. So when you hear, he crashed the car, he knocked over the coffee cup, and he never does knock over the coffee cup, but he just kind of So you get to think like stimulants act one way, depressants act the other way. Marijuana, used to say you could smell the marijuana, but not necessarily anymore because it's in a vape pen, but you still get the bloodshot eyes. I call it the Ren and Stimpy look, but you get the real bloodshot eyes. And alcohol is an easy tell. And the cops know that because they always lean in the car. They're not leaning in the car because they want to see how your breath smells. Oh yes, they're leaning in the car because they want to see how your breath smells. Once you're drank enough alcohol and your DWI and your 08, you have enough alcohol in your breath that within 6 inches you can smell it. It's on your breath. So I'm not telling parents get in your kid's face, but if you suspect a lot of drinking, you can't hide the fact that alcohol will come out the breath. Now people will have a breath mint, or they'll be downing Fireball, which is a cinnamon taste to it, but they still have the alcohol underlaying it, and that's how you tell if they're drinking alcohol. Yeah. So if you are, I'm not saying you and personally, but people who are using heroin, and you're injecting heroin. Now they always just say, look for track marks. Well, if you've ever had to give your child or yourself or a pet insulin, these needles are extremely, extremely small. So you don't see the big track marks like in the olden days with the big thicker needles, but you do see a little purple damage from injecting. So you get basically it's a hematoma. It's like when you give blood at the doctor's office. And if you're injecting, you see a lot of purple spots. And the people will say, you'll say, well, what happened to your arm? It's all purple. Oh, I had a bad reaction to the medicine. Or, yeah, I got bit by a bunch of mosquitoes in the backyard. And that doesn't make your arm purple. But the interesting thing about when you're using, and the denial is, they have prepared excuses. But normally they'll have their sleeves rolled down. It's like, well, it's kind of hot out. Why do I'm kind of cold. But they may be, blocking the damage in their arm. At the same time, when they run out of spots on their arm, they're shooting up in their neck. Neck is a common place to shoot up, and then all of a sudden they got like a turtleneck. They got he never wore it. He doesn't even like sweaters, but he's got a sweater all the way up on the neck. So yeah, you'll see that damage from the needles. You can't hide it because people who use have to use 3 to 5 times a day, and you just get damage. And a huge thing, which is happening more and more, is the sepsis. I visited people in the hospital who were regular IV users, and you become septic, meaning you have to have an antibiotic hung on you for up to a month or you will die. Another thing, just throwing out information, the cocaine and the heroin is a speedball, and it's used very commonly together. And parents will say, well, I don't understand. Johnny was using coke, but I didn't think he was using heroin, and somebody must have mixed it that way. And it could be, but a lot of times, no. They buy a bag of heroin, which isn't heroin anymore, by the way. It's all fentanyl. Buy a bag of fentanyl, bag of coke, mix it up, and that speedball is the ultimate high. And that's why the fentanyl's getting into cocaine now, because the dealers want to get you hooked on that. But here's the interesting thing and the awful thing. Cocaine is not a free ride. The fact that you are brought back in the emergency room with Narcan and they wake you up and you can breathe again, it has a terrible side effect with cocaine on board. So imagine your Narcan takes away the opioid effect. Now the cocaine effect is full blast. So you can have a heart attack or stroke from the cocaine in the midst of your heroin overdose. And I've talked to people who have had heart attacks or strokes. Cocaine is what's called a vasoconstrictor. It constricts the blood vessels in your brain really, really tightly. The pressure goes way up and then you can have a stroke. So cocaine is not a free ride. Oh, well, it's just cocaine. I'm worried about the heroin. You have to worry about everything in these mixes.